Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larson. This is part 2 of our interview with Joel Beasley.
If we go into a company and they have, like, say, 100 technologists, and they were to purchase it for all of them, like leaders, individual contributors, like everybody, then only about 10-15% of people would actually do it and be interested. So that was one thing we learned. So that's kind of like a higher level thing. About 10-15% of the people are willing, like, to put in the work and do it consistently.
Joel, in part 1, we talked a lot about the podcast, The Modern CTO, which I would highly recommend everybody go and check out. And, especially these great interviews you've got with CTO from NASA, CTO from Microsoft, Symantec, all these places. But let's shift gears for a minute and talk about your book. Tell us about that.
Okay, so it's first book I had ever written, right? I wrote the blog post and then pushed them out onto social media and ran ads against them to get people talking about each of the chapters so I could figure out what questions the readers would have and attempt to answer them ahead of time. All that being said, I would recommend the book to engineers who are or developers, programmers, coders who are transitioning to become CTO, or people interested in the story of how I made the transition from developer to CTO.
And
so that's
just for
the audience.
Just so everybody knows, the book is also called Modern CTO. You can get it on Amazon.com and whatever.
Yeah, I got some anger about the book though.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was my first book. I really didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I had valuable information to share. But here's what I found out. There's 2 ways people read or want their books. They want the stories, and then they want the practical, tactical advice. So I got, some negative reviews and comments from people who were upset that there weren't like exact steps to, perform the information I was talking about. And so in the next book we're working on, at the end of the chapter, we're going to have actual implementation. So that satisfies that part. And then I found that there's like some people who strictly care about length. And so I'm about making it as short and effective as possible. But some people want a much longer book. So I'm still in my next book. I'm still not going to make it longer because I'm all about condensed, useful information. But I am going to add the action steps to win that part of the audience.
So again, my broken record here is thinking about the principles for somebody who's trying to lead an innovative angle of their organization, and they're trying to push things forward. The idea of writing a good book is a huge opportunity, if it works, to get attention for what an organization is working on, right?
Yeah.
So talk for a minute about handling the negativity, right? It sucks to have people criticize our stuff, especially when we pour our heart and soul into it. Any practical techniques, any ideas about how to not take it personal, or how to get over it, or anything like that?
Yeah, well, the beauty of the book being on Amazon is you can actually go look and see how I handled it. So I handled it by responding to every person who left a review. And if there were some people that said, they had a question, or something was left out, or it was short, and so I said, hey, let's jump on a Skype call and I'll answer any questions you have. Like, I'm sorry that you didn't, find value in that area. Let's figure out how to improve, and jump on a call with me so we can talk about it, so I know what the audience wants. Of that, like, one person did, and it was actually really useful. So, and then for other people, I just responded, thank you for the feedback. And then I also let them know my perspective. Like, one person was negative in their entry saying, you're charging more money and making it really short so you can make more money. I was like, well, first of all, books don't really make money. Secondly, I saw the shortness as a feature, and that's actually from the comments I get on Twitter and from my audience. They're always posting pictures of it saying, this was great. I read it on a plane trip. Like, it took me 4 hours to read, or whatever.
About how long is it? Just if you know word count or page count, or
yeah, it's like a 3-4 hour read.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's funny that you say that, because you and I, before we started the show, we're talking about Zoom, and we both have respect for the CEO, Eric, over there.
Yeah.
And, he is obsessive about that. For all those years getting Zoom up and going, every time people would cancel, he was like sending them personal emails, and they would write back and be like, haha, I know this is not a responder. This is not actually the CEO of Zoom. He's like, no, it's me. Can we hop on a Zoom? I want to hear what we could have done better to have kept you. And it's just like, so customer obsessed, and look at their success, right?
Yeah, I mean, a business only exists to bring value to a market. So, whenever if I guess an innovation tip would be connect what you're doing, the work you're doing today, to how that ultimately brings value to the market, the customer you're serving. It's so easy in the larger companies to get disconnected from who the customer is, because the whole Peter Drucker thing. As your company scales, the resources to manage its internal mass grow, right? So it's very difficult. You don't get closer to the customer as your company gets bigger. You get farther from the customer. So analyzing what you do on a day-to-day basis and how that ultimately impacts the customer is just as useful as an exercise for a product development person, as a marketing director, as the janitor. Like, everybody should be acutely aware of what they're doing and how it brings value to the overall process.
Yeah. Well, I'm reading your thing here on Amazon, and I want to get some background on the Joel began writing code at age 13, selling his first technology at 18 for $1 million.
Yeah, that's exciting. It says real estate software.
What did it do?
So it made for there were let's see, how do I explain this? Mostly accounting. That was the bigger one that it did that was difficult for people. Yeah.
So thinking about this, $1 million at 18, what kind of reflecting on that? That's a different experience from the huge percentage of 18-year-olds.
Yeah.
As you reflect on that and you think about lessons you learned or advantages from that, what kind of thoughts do you have about that kind of a transaction at that age?
Yeah, it was ridiculous. So my thoughts are, I'll give you an example. So my next project after that was a financial management technology, because I had no idea about finances. I grew up very poor and I blew through the money pretty quickly. So I was reckless, and I was an 18-year-old with money. So the good part is I didn't burn like a bunch of bridges with people. I figured out how important it is to be humble, young, and I realized how little $1 million actually is. So yeah, I learned a lot of lessons, and I'm so grateful that it happened young. Like, I'm so grateful that I didn't get like $1 million at 30 and then learn all of those horrible lessons at a later stage in life when you have a family and kids and all of that. I learned them when I was single and 18. So I was very grateful for that experience. And then even more gratitude for learning how to manage my finances after that experience. So.
See, I'm a slower learner than you. I had to do that twice and lose it all both times. But this third time, I'm planning on buying commercial real estate and having a long-term passive income.
Perfect.
Slow learner.
Yeah, a little Pat Flynn or something. He's got the passive income podcast, right?
So actually, I've been talking to some folks. I was in some meetings in New York last week, and we're really thinking maybe we'll start a real estate investment trust. But
a REIT, yeah.
Yeah. So when you think about principals who, from that, the rest of us, who did make that kind of money at that kind of age, if the rest of us were trying to learn from some of your mistakes, what's one of them you'd bring up?
Well, I think the biggest mistake was just not managing money. I had no money management skills. Like, if I was a video game character and they had all the skill blocks, my ability to understand and manage finances would be zero. So that was the big mistake and takeaway from the entire experience.
Yeah. And if you were going to point people who wanted to get better at that, do you like Warren Buffett? Do you like Dave Ramsey? Where would you point people?
Either. Yeah. Either is fine. Starting, I guess, with the budget, a spreadsheet. I mean, I don't have my experience is very different. So I knew this financial advisor named Robert, and he had saw my success with the software company, right? And I went to him and I was like, Robert, I'm like going broke. I need to make some money. And so he taught me about finances. So I ended up going from like one extreme to another, where I started building software that modeled financial situations. So I just like really went overboard with it. So, my advice to replicate it would, I guess, be go make friends with a financial advisor and have him teach you everything in the world.
But you think about that. How often do we do a Google search but not actually seek out an expert to get one-on-one advice? It could be, building a podcast or, building a new car company, right? Like, regardless of the project, something similar to it has almost always been done in some form. And I think about like how lucky I've been to have the mentors I've had, people willing to take time when it wasn't worth much to them personally. And I feel like there's almost like this emotional resonance that I get when I hear the story in person from somebody, even though I'm a total audiobook nerd. I listen to my podcast, all this kind of stuff. There is something about that one-on-one-ness of somebody who has been through it, made the mistakes, paid the price, paid their dues, and hearing it from them with the tone of voice implied and these other things that come from that one-on-one type of information transfer and also guidance, somebody who can go back to repeatedly and go like, what about now? Right.
Yeah. It's amazing how I still crave like Simon Sinek. I've consumed essentially all his material available to humanity. Right. Amazing person. Listen to this guy all the time. And I still crave to like tell him my story and have him give me advice, even though like I know what it'll be, right? Like I know he's got these areas where I hear his same advice come up if you ever, follow somebody and listen to all of their content. And so I have a good idea of like the 2 or 3 things he would tell me, but there's just something inside of me that's like, I need him to tell that to me after knowing my story. There's just some additional validity to it. It's like relationships and human interaction is way undervalued in many of the digital businesses, when we're all looking at, ROI on how many ads we can show and get people to sign up and pay. So we're always disconnecting from people and turning them into numbers. And so, I guess it just even raises the need for the in-person relationship more.
It's interesting how many parts of life that helps when we quit thinking about people like a number. Almost every part of life, right?
Right.
Well, let's talk about leadershipbits.io for a minute. Lots of people are, whether they're trying to start a company, whether they're trying to expand the division of the organization they're in, they want to make something new, they want to bring in new customers. You look at leadership at leaderbits.io, and my understanding, well, why don't you give us the 30-second elevator pitch, and then I got some questions.
Yeah. So we're action-based micro content from the greatest technology leaders on earth that get you to take action every week. So we have these videos, and they're 3-minute videos. You'll hear from the CTO of NASA, something that accelerated his career, or from Microsoft, or one of these great CTOs. Then we have these action items, 1, 2, 3, things you can do with yourself or with your team. And then you have a moment of reflection, and it's all bundled into this 10-minute experience, 3-minute video, 10-minute experience. And then it's all inside of this application that tracks your accountability over time. And CTOs purchase it for their direct reports. Leaders, directors or VPs purchase it for themselves so they can turn their improvements into something tangible. And then individuals purchase it to level themselves up. So those are sort of our 3 audiences that we have that purchase our product.
That's great. Well, as you've been growing this, what are some of your lessons for, customer acquisition? That's a subject that never gets old. As you run different experiments, if you try different things, what do you feel like you've learned as far as having going from people willing to consume a podcast for free versus, plunk down dollars to actually try to take some action?
Yeah, so I learned this about if we go into a company and they have, like, say, 100 technologists, and they were to purchase it for all of them, like leaders, individual contributors, like everybody, then only about 10-15% of people would actually do it and be interested. So that was one thing we learned. So that's kind of like a higher level thing. About 10-15% of the people are willing, like, to put in the work and do it consistently. So that's I like that rule of thumb because it tends to ring true everywhere. We learned early on that enterprises are big deals that move very slowly. So we moved away from enterprises because our idea was, hey, let's help change the world by going into companies and giving this to thousands of technologists at once so that we can create better leaders and that would actually have an impact on the world. Cash flow wise, from a business standpoint, I can't wait, 9-10 months for XYZ enterprise to decide that they want to do it or not and hinge my entire company on that. So we had to refocus to the SMB space. So reading lots of books, talking to lots of people, asking for lots of help. And they said, if you win the SMB space, small, medium businesses, then you'll do well, and they move faster. They move in like 3-month quarter cycles, things like that. So we adjusted our pricing and outreach and all of that to the SMB market, and that did well. And then we also found that even with the SMB market, buying a product to improve your people, a lot of companies don't believe in improving their people. I would say most of the companies are not awesome, but our goal is to find the ones who are, and focus our energy on them. So
yeah. So what's an example? How do you do that?
How do we do it?
Sure.
All right. Well, we'll bring some value. So one of the things we do is we get people to engage and offer. You come on the show, first of all. So if you're interested in leadership, they will come on the show and talk about leadership. So that filters out. We first filter out people who are interested in leadership, right? And then we just build relationships with those types of people. We have a mission, and so we identify people who are within our purview, I guess, who meet our qualifications, because we focus on companies that have 20 to 100 plus engineers, and because that defines our market pretty well for us. For some reason, people were buying in that size, and I said, okay, well, let's not question it too much, and instead just talk to everybody in that size. Let's get more sales, right? Because we're a new company, and so that's what we did.
And again, what size was that? Say that again.
For us, it was if you have 20 to 100 engineers,
okay.
You could have 300 engineers. But once you get past about 500 engineers, you typically will have already. Here's the interesting thing: the smaller companies, they usually have a lot of struggle, and they don't know that leadership training is the solution. And then when they hit a certain size, they figured out how to solve their problems through leadership and management training. So we don't talk to the companies that have already figured out the solution. We don't, or we do a little bit, but we focus more of our energy on the people who are right at that brink where there's a lot of pressure to make something happen, but they haven't yet figured out that that's what it is. So we just learned that by talking to everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting how no amount of planning can do that for you, right? You
Zero.
Actually have to engage with them as a human instead of a number to find that out.
Many. It took me about 40 meetings to realize that enterprises will tell me that they absolutely love it. It's fantastic. They want to do it. They should do it, but it's going to take you, year or two to do something. And then it took me another 40 calls to figure out about the SMBs having a need for it, and the differences in the companies that have already solved the need. And then we're just a better way to solve. It's you could have leadership training for your technologist. Right now they're training them with the same leadership training that you would train a salesperson and extroverted salesperson with to be a leader. They use that same exact training for an introverted technologist. And so what happens is the technologist mentally checks out and writes it off as stupid, and then they don't do the training, or they just Christmas tree it in, right? So for that part of the market, we're just a more of a your tribe. We're a better solution to what they're already doing for technologists, but many of them don't make purchasing decisions like that, separated like that. They make it for the whole company. So when we talk to those people that have already identified the need and they're just buying a better version, that's one conversation. But we found that the people who are just ramping up and have a lot of pressure, that we could just educate them that this is the answer, and then put them in touch with other companies that have implemented a program and said, yeah, that was the answer to our problem. And that works out pretty well. Then they buy our product.
I love it. Do you know the Marcus Sheridan book about making websites that, actually close deals, called They Ask You Answer?
No, I should read it though.
Yeah, it's awesome. But it makes me a big fan that on leaderbits.io, you have your pricing really transparent and right there. It's
We're the only ones in the industry that do that. None of the other companies that you buy leadership training from will do that.
It's literally why we switched for ours at Mylan. Is because it's who wants to call some sales guy who's going to try and corner you? I hate calling that guy. Why would I make people call our guy? Right. Anyway.
Exactly. I cringe at it. And
I know you know the answer. Just tell me. Right.
Yeah. It's look, it turns me off so much when I'm shopping for products, and I can't just figure out, I want to be able to make the decision before I contact them. When I contact a company, it should be to facilitate the transaction.
Nice.
Like facilitate it, onboard me. Like, I want to buy your product. I've already decided before I've even, so I just figured we give everybody all the information in the world. And then now we don't get unqualified leads bothering us, right?
Yeah.
Like,
It's like, do you think
super
they're
useful.
magically going to come up with extra budget because they talk to you? Like either they can afford this or not, right?
Right. Yeah. It's either in their thing or they mark it down. No, that's cool, but I'll do it for next year,
Yeah. Well, listen, we're in pretty similar spaces. We've got a number of things in common. Obviously, a little bit of a different target. But what advice would you have for us at Mylan, whether it's the show, whether it's our leadership program, just any kind of thoughts in general?
Yeah, you guys should partner with us. Look at our platform and check out how we do this bit thing because, I'd say a big question that we get a lot is they get frustrated. What I was talking about earlier, they get frustrated that they can't just buy the solution for everybody because we focus on technologists, right? So if we had content from, other leaders that weren't technology leaders, that would be really useful to include in our programs. That way we could train everyone plus their technologist. We just don't have that. We don't have those relationships yet. So
I love it. Sounds like we need to have an offline conversation here.
probably.
Well, before we go here, is there anything, whether it has to do with this stuff or not, like, a question you wish media would ask you when you're getting interviewed, or just something that's one of your soapboxes? Just if it was a free for all, what do you want to close with? What's something that's you're passionate about?
Discipline. I would say learn to fall in love with it because it's freedom. And once you figured out how to structure and discipline your life, you can have anything you want.
And I know you mentioned Tony Robbins and Simon Sinek. Anybody else that you feel like helped you in kind of conquering yourself, mastering yourself?
Yeah, I love John Maxwell. He's a fantastic author on leadership. He's been around for quite a while. I think he's written over 100 books on it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny. I've read a number of his, but not all of them by any means. But I find myself going back to Developing the Leader Within. Just
Ooh, that's a good one.
Over the years, that's the one I find myself going back to a number of times and recommending to other people.
Yeah, he's part of my talk.
Oh, really?
Yeah, leadership is influence. When I first heard him say that blew my mind. And ever since then, I've been blinded by that light. To me, there's no other way around it. He's proved it. In order to be a leader, you have to have a follower. And in order to have a follower, you have to have influenced someone. So on its most basic level, first principles physics, they're intertwined perfectly. You cannot have one without the other. And the only way you can get the followers through influence. And so leadership is influence.
Yeah, love it. Well, thanks for doing this. Thanks for making time for this.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, folks, check out the Modern CTO podcast and book, and check out leaderbits.io as well. Thanks again. Well, that's it for the episode. One other thing I wanted to tell you about, if you remember the guys from Convoy in episodes back, Ken Free and Trent Mano, I went on one of their CEO trips to New York, and I met a guy named Brent Thompson, very successful entrepreneur. He was former CEO of Jive Communications, big company now, I think $300 or $400 million. Anyways, he started a new company called blipbillboards.com. I'm super stoked they're a sponsor now. But I remember a year and some ago when I met him, I thought it was genius. Instead of having to buy 6 months or a year's worth of billboard for thousands of dollars, you can buy 8 seconds at a time for 10 or 20 cents. You pick what billboard you want it on, what time of day you want it to run. And it just puts so much power in the hands of marketers and CEOs who want to try something and see if it works. You can buy as many or as few as you want, change it as many times as you want. I think now our podcast is being advertised on billboards in 18 different states because we have these guys as sponsors. We're pretty excited about it. Hope you check out blipbillboards.com. Thanks.